Welcome back to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings on the industry you can regularly read over on The Wrap, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can still listen to on Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. He and I are recording this week's show on Monday, November 10th, which is the day before Veterans Day. Want to take a second here to acknowledge all of you who spent time in uniform. Want to thank you for your service. Mind you, Drew, I realize that a lot of people who joined the military did not have it as easy as I did in the U.S. Army back in the mid-1980s. I've told you about my time in uniform, right?
You were a glorified, kind of an army archer type character. You were out there reviewing movies. You were doing, right?
Yeah, and also important to point out here, I wound up being stationed 20 minutes away from my childhood home at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I mean, I would literally drive home on weekends to do laundry. And as Drew mentioned, I showed up at the base newspaper and they didn't have a job for me. So they're like, all right, you're the entertainment writer. And so same job, dear Lord, that's 40 years ago. But seriously, folks, this was your tax dollar work. At least once a week, I would climb into a military vehicle, which Drew had emblazoned on the side in a white stencil for official government use only. And then, I'd go to the movies, or I'd go to a museum, or Riverside, that big theme park out in the middle of Western Massachusetts, and then I would come back to the Fort Devens Dispatch and write a review. And now, again, want to stress that not everybody who wore a uniform had a similar experience. And I was reminded of this because if you remember last week's show, Drew mentioned that he just got his copy of Xavier X Atencio, that great new book from Disney Editions, which is, the subtitle tells us, takes a detailed look at the legacy of an artist, Imagineer, and Disney legend. So, Drew, have you had a chance yet to crack this 206-page coffee table book?
I've just looked through it. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I love these books that we've gotten for the past few years that really shine a spotlight on these individual Imagineers and Disney artists. We had the Mark Davis book, which was just so amazing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I really it looks beautiful. I haven't read it yet, but I am very excited. What about you?
I've been paging through it, and what's kind of interesting, again, we're talking about Veterans Day. It actually has a lot of the artwork from when X went in during World War II, and in fact, February of 1942, he gets assigned to cryptography school. But the only problem is that this particular school is located in Greenland, which, as X expresses multiple times in cartoon form, is colder than hell. And that, to me, in fact, you mentioned the Mark Davis 2-volume that Chris Merritt and Pete Docter did. But what's great about this book is because it's actually done by members of X's family. I mean, we get X, the family drawn Christmas cards. We get cartoons he drew for coworkers or that sort of thing. And I got to say, whether you're an animation fan or a theme park enthusiast, or you got one of those on your holiday shopping list, you can't go wrong with this book. It's an amazing look back at X Atencio's career in Disney animation and Imagineering, and it's worth it alone if you're a Haunted Mansion fan, because have you ever heard the alternate narration for the Haunted Mansion that Paul Frees did when he did like the Peter Lorre impression?
No, I have
not.
My God! Where can I hear this?
It's out there online, but it's full Peter Lorre, and it keeps talking about beware of that one-eyed cat, and the boards for this version of the mansion with the one-eyed cat, X's beautiful pastels. definitely check that out, folks. And hey, while we're plugging things on this podcast, I guess you should take a sec to acknowledge our sponsor, which is unlockmagic.com, where you can get real discounts on Walt Disney World and Universal Orlando tickets, sometimes upwards of 12% off. And just so you know, Unlock Magic is run by the exact team behind the DVC rental store and the DVC resale market. So just pick your dates, grab your tickets for things like those after-hours hard ticket things at the Florida parks, like Mickey's Very Merry, which is now going on, folks, on select nights at the Magic Kingdom through December 21st, and Jollywood Nights, which just got underway for the 2025 holiday season at Disney's Hollywood Studios last week, and again, presented on select nights through December 22nd. Oh, and when you get your tickets, please tell the nice folks at unlockmagic.com that Drew and Jim sent you. And before we plunge into the box office news, a little news item just bubbled up in the trades. Danny Lin has just been elected as the new president of the Animation Guild, Local 839. And Drew, what I thought might intrigue you about this is that Danny's a storyboard artist, and among the shows she has worked on is the Adventure Time spinoff, Fiona and Cake.
I love it. I mean, this is, a hugely important union in the animation industry, and I'm very excited that a Fiona and Cake alum is going to be in charge of it.
And Drew's not wrong. There are more than 5,000 members in Local 839, and but she's going to be sworn in on December 2nd. So again, kudos to her. And on previous editions of this podcast, Drew has talked up Predator Badlands. You seem to enjoy it quite a bit when you got to see it early on. And more to the point, evidently they mounted an amazing promotional campaign for this thing. Because did you see how it did this past weekend?
Yeah, I'm so thrilled. I mean, they were tracking it at about 25, and it ended up making, over 40?
Yes,
is that the official number we're going with?
That is a record breaker for this franchise.
Yep, and I think it kind of shook everybody out of the doldrums of October being so terrible. I'm sure you saw that Pamela McClintock article about how bad October was at the box office. It's rough. By the way, worth noting that in addition to the $40 million domestic, overseas, Predator Badlands also did $40 million, and that's a best ever opening weekend for the Predator film franchise. And again, I think we were talking previously about Prey, as well as that animated version of Predator. Yeah, Predator Killer of Killers.
Yeah.
And so good. You saw that one, right, Jim?
I did. And what was fascinating to me was that supposedly those projects were walked in, Predator Killer of Killers, the animated thing with the three separate stories that sort of tied together at the end, and Predator Badlands were evidently walked in on the exact same day. And it was like, yep, we're doing both of them. So crazy. So
we should all be so lucky.
Yeah.
We should all be so lucky. But yeah, with this box office, I think we're going to see more, Jim. More of the Predator soon. Right?
Yeah. And but again, this is Disney. They do sequels. And speaking of which, we have Zootopia 2 opening in theaters Wednesday, November 26th. And wondering if you saw the box office projections for this, Jared Bush, Byron Howard film.
No, tell me. Tell me, Jim.
They are saying that over the long Thanksgiving Day weekend, again, this opens in theaters on Wednesday, the 26th, and they'll count all of the ticket sales right up until Sunday night. They're projecting North America alone, 125 million. Does that jibe with what you've been hearing?
Wow. I mean, I assumed so. The rest of November is going to be pretty spectacular, I think, between Wicked and Zootopia 2. I'm really excited to see it. I mean, we've waited so long for the sequel, and I hope it's more warmly received than the 3D movie in the tree of life, Jim. Let's just say that.
Well, I think we talked about that on last week's show, and what's interesting is that narrative, that it's a nice kids film. I'm hearing that come from all different directions, but on the other hand, that there were supposedly a lot of kids who, when they saw It's Tough to Be a Bug, and it's like the show with the giant spiders coming down from above, thank you, no, we're not going back to that. So, maybe that was the plan all along. Anyway, back to animation news. Chainsaw Man. By the way, the only animated film to chart on the top 10 this past weekend. 3.6 million, which was enough to get that anime film, the number 7 spot on this past weekend's top 10. And Drew and I have talked previously on Fine Tuning about how anime films seem to have been performing stronger and doing far better business domestically over this past year. And do we still think that a lot of this is on the heels of people, seeing K-pop Demon Hunters on Netflix and going, ooh, I want to see more of stuff like that? Or
well, I think it's just that anime is just totally broken through to the mainstream. I mean, we've talked about the fact that Netflix released some stat that like 40% of all households internationally watch anime. So I really think that, as we've talked about before, like a lot of these anime projects are building off of series or, things like that. And Chainsaw Man is no different.
No, absolutely.
But yeah, I'm curious as we move into award season, if any of these things are going to kind of break through and be one of the nominated animated features this year.
You've got to assume, K-pop Demon Hunters, became this giant pop culture phenomenon, basically blotted out the sun this summer. And face it, just in the past week, we learned that surprise, surprise. I think you actually broke the story on the wrap that there was a K-pop Demon Hunters movie coming, and now we know when, 2029, right?
Yes, although I have heard that is pretty tenuous and premature, let us say.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because if you consider, you were just talking about, Zootopia and how, the original film for that, came out in March of 2016. And here we are, November of 2025. And, finally we're getting the sequel. If you've been paying attention to how these sorts of follow-up projects percolate through the Disneys, the DreamWorks, the Illuminations, 4 years is fast, right? It's pretty fast.
It's wishful thinking, let's just say that. And if we look at other Sony Pictures animation projects, like, I don't know, Jim, say the 2 Spider-Verse sequels, you'll see that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that is certainly the case here. I think what's most important is that they take their time. They deliver a sequel that is just as exciting and emotional as the first one, and I have no doubt that they'll do it, but I've heard that the deals have not even been finalized for the filmmakers, so it'll be a little while. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. But again, we're talking about something that showed up on Netflix this past summer. And this Friday, November 15th, we get In Your Dreams, that Alex Wu film from Cuckoo Studios. Actually seems to have gotten some halfway decent reviews out there. Collider Sean Van Horns describes In Your Dreams as one of the more visually stunning, funniest, and beautifully touching films of the year, where Frank Schnecht over at The Hollywood Reporter says the witty humor and genuine emotionalism of this Alex Wu movie recalls the best of Pixar. Drew, would you back that up?
Yeah, I really liked it. Jim, I've been telling you this. I saw this movie 8 months ago or something. I thought it was great.
Okay.
All right. And it's the animation is great. Again, provided by Sony Pictures. ImageWorks, the same fine folks who did K-pop Demon Hunters. But it's a really sweet movie, and I think you will be invested and moved by it. So I'm very excited for Jim to see it in probably 8 months from now. He will watch.
I'm sorry. It's like Oh, God. Star Wars Visions, all right, which, by the way, we really should have talked up when it first came out on Wednesday, October 29th. We got 9 new animated shorts set in a galaxy far, far away. But interesting, the reviews this time around weren't quite as enthusiastic as they were for the previous 2 editions, but Drew, if we're being honest here, same thing happened in '83 with the 3rd Star Wars movie, Return of the Jedi. Just sort of, I don't know if Star Wars does 3s well.
Did you watch them? I thought they were really great. They're much longer this time, but there are some really beautiful pieces in this batch. So
okay, I will make the time then, along with In Your Dreams. We talked about books earlier in this week's Fine Tuning. I want to remind folks that The Art of Zootopia 2 hits store shelves next week, Tuesday, November 18th, and that's just 8 days out from when this new feature-length animated film from Disney arrives in theaters. But Drew, just the other night, I caught a TV commercial for Zootopia 2 and was surprised at, the voiceover at the end that said, "This film is not yet rated." And it's like, really? 2 weeks out? And, what? We're still talking with the MAAPA about, what this is, whether it's a G or a PG?
That's insane. It's going to be PG based on what I've seen, I'm sure, but that's weird that it has not been rated yet. Maybe it hasn't been finished yet.
Well,
the wrap party was on Saturdays,
right.
Jim. So
all right. You may be onto something there. But by the way, what Drew said is true. The original Zootopia, again, out in theaters, March of 2016, wasn't G, but rather PG for thematic elements, rude humor, and action. And by the way, that's also what happened with Encanto. When that debuted on Disney Plus, right? I'm remembering this correctly. Not theatrically, but November of 2000.
No, Encanto was in theaters, but it debuted in theaters on Thanksgiving, and it was on Disney Plus by Christmas.
There we go.
So
right.
It was a very quick turnaround.
All right, I stand corrected. But that got a PG rating as well for thematic elements and mild peril. And this Drew suddenly got me, and it's like I think we really need to revisit the ratings of some of the more recent Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, and Illumination films to see, well, who got a G and who got a PG. And by the way, back in November of 2005, Chicken Little got a G. And when we get back from this break, we'll take a closer look at how that particularly animated feature from Disney Studios eventually arrived in theaters. But first, this.
Hello, I'm Chris Cox, and I've teamed up with Len Tester to argue before our judge, Jim Hill, as he presides over us on our new podcast, The Case For with Chris Cox. In every episode, Len and I will argue about the big Disney debates like park hopping, early entry, and whether churros count as a food group. Whether you're planning a trip or just love Disney debates, it's the perfect podcast for you. Search The Case For with Chris Cox wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. Of course, when I use the term we, I'm meaning the royal we. And no, I'm not talking about when King Charles needs to use the loo, but rather it's now just me doing the rest of this week's Fine Tuning. I want to stress here that this is not Mr. Taylor's fault. Drew wanted to continue with recording this particular podcast. Unfortunately, up here in southern New Hampshire, right as Ian and I were finishing the news portion of this week's Fine Tuning, we experienced a weather event. A lot of rain, a lot of wind, branches came down on power lines. Consequently, the Dixie cup and string that Nancy and I used to connect to the internet no longer worked. So while Eversource, our local power company, plunged ahead with fixing that, I sat here in the dark and cobbled together a solo edition of this week's feature, which, as you may recall from last week's show, was supposed to be the conclusion of Drew and my's history of Disney's Chicken Little, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary of its original theatrical release this month. Though maybe using the term celebrating is really overstating the situation, at least as far as the mouse is concerned. I want to say that there's a cloisonne pin out there that acknowledges that 2025 is Chicken Little's 20th anniversary. It's released to theaters, but that's basically it. And yep, just went over to the DisneyStore.com and checked. And when I typed in chicken, I was told there were 3 items for sale, but all of those were related to Hey Hey, the brain dead rooster from the Moana movies. But when I expanded my search term to say Chicken Little, the message I got from DisneyStore.com was no result found for. Which is kind of appropriate given that when Chicken Little first arrived in theaters on November 4th, 2005, this full-length animated feature didn't deliver the results that the Disney corporate was looking for either, which was to show DreamWorks and Pixar that Disney, all on its own, could deliver a hit CG film. And if we look at box office totals for that year, 2005, Chicken Little didn't even crack the top 10. It's the 15th top earner in North America for that year, with 131 million in ticket sales in that territory, which puts Chicken Little just ahead of Illumination's Robots. Any of you folks remember that animated feature? That CG animated film sold just 128 million worth of tickets domestically. Mind you, there's a CG animated film that did crack the top 10 in 2005, and that was DreamWorks' Madagascar. That sold 193 million worth of tickets in North America, and an additional 340 million worth of tickets overseas, for a worldwide gross of 542 million, over $500 million. Which, of course, led to sequels. We got Madagascar Escape to Africa in 2008, and Madagascar Europe's Most Wanted in 2012, not to mention a holiday special, Merry Madagascar, that debuted in 2009. There was a spin-off film, The Penguins of Madagascar, released to theaters 2014, not to mention several animated TV series. Penguins of Madagascar television show that debuts in 2008, All Hail King Julian, 2014, and then Madagascar, a Little Wild, effectively a Tiny Toons version of these characters, that debuts in 2020. There was also a theme park ride, Madagascar The Crate Adventure, Universal Studios Singapore opened in 2011 and closed back in 2022. But again, this is what happens when your animated feature only costs $75 million to make, and then it goes on to sell, over $500 million worth of tickets worldwide. Powers it be that DreamWorks Animation said, okay, Madagascar is clearly a hit. Let's turn this film into a full-fledged franchise. Whereas Disney's Chicken Little, it actually cost twice as much to make as the original Madagascar. We're talking $150 million versus $75 million. But then it winds up doing less than 60% of the business that DreamWorks animation film did worldwide. We're talking $314 million versus $542 million. And look, long story short, Chicken Little doesn't even recover its production and promotional costs, let alone turn a profit for the studio. As Mr. Taylor has often reminded us, Hollywood math is different. Your film has to make at least 3 times its overall production or promotional costs before it then finally begins to eke out a profit. Which is why all plans for furthering this franchise, like a home premiere sequel to Chicken Little, which would have largely focused on Abby Mallard. That's the character that Joan Cusack voiced in the original film, The Ugly Duckling. That gets tabled. Likewise, a Chicken Little animated series, which would have picked up right after the events of the original film. And to be honest, a lot of this happened on the heels of the Walt Disney Company acquiring Pixar Animation Studio in January of 2006 for $7.4 billion. John Lasseter, who was quickly put in charge of anything involving animation at the Mouse House, which included Pixar's output, what Walt Disney Animation Studios was doing at the time, as well as Disney Toon Studios. And that's the arm of the company that made all those direct-to-video sequels. And John wanted the studio to make a fresh start. So he watches all of the work in progress stuff that Disney has in the works at Feature Animation and Disney Toon. And he actually quickly shuts down a number of things. In fact, one of them was American Dog. Chris Sanders, very eagerly anticipated follow-up to his earlier massive hit, Lilo and Stitch. Kind of interesting here, Lasseter reportedly especially didn't like the idea that in American Dog, all of the animal characters, well, first of all, they walked upright on 2 feet, and that they were able to communicate directly with humans, no problem. And a weird little bend on the story, Brad Bird, who had only just taken over directing Ratatouille at Pixar, after that animated feature's original director, Jean Pancava, had been forced off the project. Well, he took Lasseter's note about animals not walking upright on 2 feet and not being able to communicate directly with humans very much to heart. Which is why when that Pixar film finally arrived in theaters, you will note that Remy and his rat friends, when they are moving from place to place, scurry on all 4 feet. More to the point that when Remy is communicating with Linguini, this is mostly done with pantomime. Anyway, Ratatouille arrives in theaters June of 2007, and it, like Chicken Little, costs $150 million to make. Key difference here, though, folks, is that Ratatouille makes $723 million at the worldwide box office, which means that Pixar, and again, remember that Hollywood math, is actually able to recover all of its production and promotional costs and eke out a teeny profit for Disney Studios. And not for nothing, Ratatouille also then goes on to win that year's Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. And, of course, this is a case of that film. The professional recognition leads to the 2 Remy Ratatouille adventure attractions, the one at the France Pavilion Epcot, and then, of course, the original that was built at Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris. Likewise, there was that living character initiative thing that was done inside of the Chefs de France restaurant at Epcot, where a teeny animatronic version of Remy was rolled around the dining area and then revealed by lifting the cover of a silver serving tray. And we can't even begin to count the numbers away that the food and wine celebration, or the Festival of Food and Wine at Epcot has been tied to Ratatouille over the past 18 years. But this is what Disney does. When they have an IP that's a success, they actively look for ways to keep that film and its characters in the spotlight. Whereas if you look at it, something like Chicken Little, which it was perceived as a failure, well, there's also a Hollywood tradition of quickly burying your mistakes. But why did Chicken Little fail? I have some theories, which we'll get to in a sec. But first, this. And we're back. I have to say it's kind of odd that we're just 2 weeks out now from Zootopia 2 arriving in theaters, which is, of course, the long-awaited sequel to Disney's Zootopia, which opened in theaters back in March of 2016, sold over $1 billion worth of tickets worldwide, not to mention winning that year's Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. But here's the thing. Chicken Little, also, just like Zootopia, is set in a world with anthropomorphic animals that walk upright, wear clothes, and talk. So why didn't that film from Mark Dindale and Randy Fulmer connect with audiences in the same way that the original Zootopia did? I have a couple of theories about that. Remember how on the last episode of Fine Tuning, I talked about how Dindale and Fulmer, when they were first working on Chicken Little, wanted to make a small film, something more along the lines of Disney's Dumbo, which I'll remind you was only 64 minutes long when it was released to theaters in 41, and that includes the titles and the closing credits. Whereas Michael Eisner, well, if Chicken Little was going to be Disney Feature Animation's official introduction to the world of CG, He needed that previously deliberately modest movie to be far bigger, which is why this film's The Sky is Falling storyline then got transformed into, in Act 3, a full-scale alien invasion. But Mark and Randy, well, again, they started out by developing Chicken Little to be kind of this out there comedy where it was the charm of this smallish world and the fairy tale characters who live there. Again, Ugly Duckling, Foxy Loxy, Turkey Lurkey, Fish Out of Water, Runt of the Litter. It was character-driven stuff that was going to be the springboard for laughs. And not to mention the heart of the storyline that originally powered Chicken Little. You need to remember that this movie initially was built around Chicken Little, who at that time was a stressed out young girl who had lost a lot of her confidence and her sense of her place in the world on the heels of her mom's recent passing. And then there was Buck Cluck, who was Chicken Little's well-meaning dad, who was also still trying to find his way on the heels of his wife's sad passing, and who now felt over his head, in over his head as Buck Cluck, was now trying to raise a teenage daughter all on his own. And so you can't take that sort of story structure and virtually at the last minute foist an action movie finale on it. That's kind of like adding a Hemi to a tricycle. It's going to overwhelm a lot of what came before it. But again, when you do these sorts of projects for a company like Disney, well, all right, this is where we have to call feature animation for what it is, which is corporate filmmaking. I mean, you're not making something private, personal, and small here. You're making a movie where at some point in the production process, you literally have to step out of your comfort space, go to a conference room, and sit down with a representative from McDonald's to then have a very serious discussion about which characters, or in this case from Chicken Little, were then going to be turned into toys for Happy Meals. And then when you factor in what was going on behind the scenes at Disney Feature Animation at this time, and let's just tick them off here, folks. Disney Feature Animation France closes in the summer of 2003. Then Disney Feature Animation Florida closes in January of 2004. In July of 2005, Disney Toon Studios announces that it will be closing its satellite facility in Australia the following year, 2006. So there is a lot of heartache and turmoil going on here, especially on the heels of David Stanton, who had just become the new head of Disney Feature Animation, who had announced that after Home on the Range was released to theaters in April of 2004, Disney was then going to turn its back on nearly 70 years of tradition and transition from being a studio that only did hand-drawn animation to one that then did CG. And a quick side note here. When John Lasseter became the new Ubermeister of all things animation related at the Walt Disney Company, again, this is January of 2006, Lasseter, for one, really didn't like how the films that Disney Feature Animation and Pixar Animation Studios, how they were being described at the time. And to explain, the full-length animated features that Disney was producing, again, we're talking prior to 2005, they were described as traditional animation, whereas the computer animated films that Pixar and DreamWorks were making were described as CG, as in computer graphics. Okay, at Lasseter's insistence, the terms that we used to describe these two forms of animation were changed. Traditional animation then became known as hand-drawn animation, whereas CG then became known as computer animation. And in Lasseter's mind, this effectively leveled the playing field, so to speak. Anyway, with everything that was then going on behind the scenes at Disney Animation, again, we're talking 2003 to 2004, And let's be honest here, we can't forget about what's going on outside of the company at the exact same time, which is the Save Disney movement, which is where Roy E. Disney and Stanley Gold are mounting this very public campaign to get Michael Eisner removed as Disney's CEO. All of this is raising the stakes for the Chicken Little production team. I mean, now it wouldn't be enough now for this animated feature to simply be fun and entertaining, to justify its rapidly inflating production costs. And the other thing being we need to factor in here is Disney is spending a ton of money to transform their animation studio from a traditional, hand-drawn operation to a computer animation production facility. You're talking an investment of hundreds of millions of dollars, being spent on new equipment and training. And so now, under these circumstances, Chicken Little can't be a modest success. It has to be a huge hit, which, given its release date, again, November 4th, 2005, probably wasn't going to be possible, given that it was arriving in theaters just 2 weeks before Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, which I'll remind you, if you're familiar with the books of the series, is literally the linchpin for the rest of that epic storyline that J.K. Rowling created. Because in this book and in this film, Voldemort finally returns. And I guess I should have put a spoiler in front of it. Hey, but what are you going to do? All right, so to be blunt here, every Harry Potter fan in the world was going to go see Goblet of Fire when it opened in theaters on November 18th. And by the way, that's actually what happened. Goblet of Fire wound up being the second highest grossing film for all of 2005. Only Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, did bigger business at the box office that year. So this just basically means that poor little Chicken Little only has a weekend or maybe two before Goblet of Fire effectively comes along and eats up the entire family audience for the next couple of weeks worth of box office. So again, you take the 30,000 foot view here. There are a variety of things that ultimately did in Chicken Little. Creative meddling at the executive level, unrealistic expectations for this project overall, not to mention a certain boy wizard. But the irony here is if you go in cold now to Chicken Little, I think you'll be surprised to learn that there's this small, very funny, genuinely heartfelt film to be found here, which then in its third act basically becomes the slapstick version of Independence Day. But but that, me personally, I'm willing to tolerate that because Dindal and Fulmer load up this section of their film with character-driven gags and smart payoffs to earlier story elements. But even so, it kind of pisses me off. Apologies for the adult language here, that the modern Disney company is doing so little now to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the theatrical release of Chicken Little. Mark Dindale, Randy Fulmer, and the rest of the artists and the animators who worked on this project under extraordinarily stressful conditions really do deserve better than that. And you know who else deserves better than he got today? And that's Drew Taylor, my co-host on this podcast, who, due to a swath of technical issues that were certainly beyond my control, though let's be honest here, folks, there are days where I don't have the skills necessary to operate the toaster in the kitchen. Anyway, through no fault of his own, Drew had to sit out the second half of today's fine-tuning. But if you really want to hear more of Mr. Taylor, there is, of course, Light the Fuse, which is that wonderful, not to mention official, Mission Impossible podcast that Drew did with Charles Hood. There are nearly 300 episodes to choose from, each of them loaded with amazing behind-the-scenes stories about this hugely, successful and very entertaining film series. Mind you, I hope you'll be able to say the same thing after you listen to some of the other podcasts we host here at Jim Hill Media. I mean, that you hear some amazing stories. And those shows include Disney Dish with Len Testa, the Epic Universal podcast I do with Eric Hersey. Likewise, I Want That, the Disney Merch podcast I do with Eric's lovely bride, Lauren. Oh, also want to remind you about Manufacturing the Magic. That's the themed entertainment history podcast that we host here at Jim Hill Media, that's produced by Noah and Shelley Valladolid. There'll be a brand new episode of that show posting Saturday after next. Likewise, there will be a brand new episode of The Case 4 with Chris Cox. That'll be dropping on Wednesday, November 19th. Over on Patreon, you should finally be able to hear a brand new subscriber exclusive show. This one features Len Testa and veteran Imagineer Jim Schul talking about the Astrojets at Disneyland. You'll hear me for a little bit at the very start of that recording, but then, hey, what a surprise! I begin having technical issues and effectively have to sit out the rest of that recording session. Mind you, that has nothing to do with Eric Hersey and David Gray, who always do such a great job when it comes to editing and producing this podcast. That tech stuff, that issue, that's all on me, folks. Anyway, as I run for the curtain here, I have a quick favor to ask of you folks. If you could please head over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review, well, not just this show, but also Light the Fuse. Also, I guess I should mention social media as I head for the door here. Drew can be found on X and Instagram and Blue Sky as Drew Tailored, as in a tailored shirt. As for me, you can find me on X and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and then over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. Anyway, that is going to do it for this week, folks. So on behalf of Mr. Taylor, thanks for listening to this week's Fine Tuning, and he and I will be back soon.